How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to week 4 of my Overwatch League Stage 4 key matches. Last week we saw some pretty insane games. There were a whole bunch of crazy close matches, and we even saw 3 reverse sweeps thanks to the Charge, Eternal, and Gladiators. And surprisingly, I somehow managed to post a 7-1 record in terms of who I thought would win my key matches last week, so let's see if I can replicate this kind of success once again. It's also crucial to note that major playoff implications could be on the line this week, so that's a big time theme in today's video. But before I get into it, let me quickly explain a few things. For one, if you're new to this series, then allow me to tell you how it works. So basically, what I do is pick out games that I recommend watching every single week of the regular season. I usually give a brief explanation as to why I feel each game could be entertaining and give my score predictions as well. I also may highlight specific player matchups that I recommend keeping an eye on. And that's basically it. The format is fairly simple. The other thing I wanted to make clear before getting started is that there will be slightly less action this week. Instead of the typical 4 matches that you would see on Thursday and Friday, there will instead only be 3 on each day. This is nothing new at this point though. This was done in week 4 for the other 3 stages as well. But unlike those times, the games this week will begin at the typical 4 p.m. Pacific start time. So if you live in the US and on the East Coast like myself and maybe have school or work in the morning, then you don't have to worry too much about staying up too late since the night will likely end by the time the 4th game would usually start. And don't feel concerned over the weekend games if you want to have a lot of action this week. The typical 4 matches will still happen on Saturday and Sunday at their usual start times. Okay, that's everything I wanted to explain I think, so without wasting any more time, let's get started. So starting off on the shortened Thursday, I have just one key match for you guys and it involves the Shanghai Dragons taking on the Seoul Dynasty. If I recall, this is a rematch from week 1 this stage. In that game, the Dragons kind of rolled the Dynasty in what was a pretty easy 3-1 victory. But both these teams have gone through quite a lot since then. The Dragons haven't won a game since that win against Seoul, and the Dynasty have pretty much been up and down this entire stage. They got quality wins over the Valiant and Defiant, but also got reverse swept by the Charge. And even though Seoul lost that game to Shanghai, they currently have the better record this stage and in the overall standings. But even so, Seoul is only 1 game ahead of Shanghai right now for that 7th place spot, and if the Dynasty want to hold on to it and potentially stay in the running for a top 6 spot, then they have to win this game. It is crucial that they come out on top here, and the same can be said for Shanghai. This is a must-win game for them as well if they want to have any sort of hope of climbing up in the standings and or sneaking into the top 6 themselves. This game could end up being really big for the sake of the playoff race, so it's a must-watch worthy game in my opinion. But who has the advantage coming into this? Well, if we're basing it off their previous matchup, then you would likely argue that Shanghai has the slight advantage. But with how early that game occurred in the stage, I'm sure both sides have made some adjustments and improvements while getting used to the new meta. At the very least, I'm expecting this game to be closer than the last one. There's a lot riding on the outcome, and I'm sure that both teams are going to more than give it their all to make sure their team is the one to be in a better position come playoff time. Also, both teams are coming off a tough loss, with Shanghai losing at the hands of the Shock and the Dynasty getting reverse swept by the Charge. So I suspect that both sides could get off to a slow start, kind of like with the London and Vancouver game. As for my winner of this bout, I think I'm going to go with the Dynasty in a Super 10's 5-map series. I feel that the Dragons have been less consistent this stage. Seoul may not have a great record either, but at least they've looked competitive in their games as of late. Yes, they did get reverse swept, but nearly taking down the Charge who are on the rise and beating the Valiant in a crazy map 5 situation is pretty impressive. Meanwhile, the Dragons lost to Toronto, who Seoul defeated, and they fared no better against the Shock. I believe that Seoul clutches this game out after a slow start, and they get that sour taste of a reverse sweep out of their mouths while inching ever so closer to that number 6 spot. Now we move on to Friday, and this is the night that I believe will be full of very interesting games from the entertainment and playoff picture aspect of things. Kicking off the night, we have the Atlanta Reign versus the Washington Justice. These teams have been 2 of the strongest teams in the league in Stage 4 so far, so naturally this matchup has been receiving a lot of hype. And I'll be honest, I'm right there with anybody else who feels like this game is going to be a banger. Atlanta and Washington have both been pretty dominant as of late. Neither side has really been dropping all that many maps. It's pretty obvious that both of these teams have a very good understanding of the meta and have been taking full advantage of it. Erster, Corey, and Stratus in particular have looked really good in any sort of Reaper May or Sniper comp. So with that said, pay attention to the DPS here. I think whichever side makes more pop-off plays will likely be the one to come out on top. But it's hard to say which side is going to do better since Atlanta and Washington's DPS have been popping off on a consistent basis this stage. But it's not just the DPS that make this game extra exciting. First off, this will be the Reign's first big test to see if they are a legit threat or not. Sure, they've looked good in the 3 games they played so far, but it's not like they beat anybody impressive. The Spark, Outlaws, and Eternal are either at the bottom or middle of the pack in the Stage 4 standings right now. Here's Atlanta's opportunity to show us what they're really made of. If they can take down the Washington Justice, or at least make this set competitive, then I think we can finally confirm that they are for real and could very well end up being dangerous heading into the playoffs. Also, Atlanta has yet to guarantee themselves a playoff spot, and a win here would really increase the likelihood that they clinch one. And who could forget about the potential undefeated stage for the Washington Justice? If they beat Atlanta, then I'm willing to bet that they finish 7-0 since their final opponent is the Paris Eternal. So who wins this clash between two top tier teams? Well, it's very difficult to say. I believe this game could most definitely go either way. Atlanta had no games in week 3, so they had extra time to prepare for these matchups this week, so that should theoretically give them a slight advantage. But the Reign have yet to really beat anybody impressive, so they don't have my full trust just yet, so I think I'm going to pick the Justice to come out on top 3-2. How evenly matched these teams seem to be on paper, plus all the interesting storylines makes this a must-watch game. This has Game of the Week potential written all over it. I highly recommend tuning in. Up next is the Chengdu Hunters versus the San Francisco Shock, which is yet another game with major implications on the line for playoffs. Not so much for the Shock since they've already locked up that number 3 seed, I believe, for the playoffs, but the Hunters still have playoff aspirations of their own that they want to see through. After losing a must-win game to the Spark, the Hunters find themselves with a very narrow lead over the Valiant for that final spot in the end-of-year play-in tournament. The Hunters can't afford to lose again, or their playoff hopes could be in jeopardy. All it takes is one more Valiant win and one Hunters loss for them to move down a spot in the standings, and with them only having 2 games left on their schedule, they need every win they can get at this point. This game should be a very interesting rematch. The Hunters narrowly came out on top in the last game, but that was back when the Shock still wanted to play GOATs, and now they can't obviously because of 2-2-2. It's a whole new Shock team now, and as good as the Hunters are with their DPS comps, the Shock have been looking strong as well. Architect and Rascal have made for a really deadly 1-2 punch, especially when it comes to the Reaper May comps, and Sinatra's been doing a really good job on dive heroes when his team subs him in on certain maps. The Shock look just as comfortable in this meta, so I don't think the Hunters have much of an advantage, if they even have one at all, that is. They can't really abuse Sombra that much, so they're going to have to come up with other strategies to stump their opponents here. As exciting as the DPS are in this match, I would look out for the tanks. I think that this game really comes down to which side executes more combos and which off-tank player is going to negate more of those blizzards. Smurf and Choyobin versus Among and Elsa will be very interesting to watch. In terms of who I think wins, well, I say that the Shock take it 3-1. I don't think there's any tricks the Hunters could pull off to give them the upper hand. Plus, it's hard to trust a team who just got beaten badly by the struggling Spark. I think the Shock win this game with relative ease. And finally, we wrap up Friday night with the Gladiators and Spark. These two teams find themselves neck and neck in the top 6, so whoever wins this game will be the one to pull ahead. It's also worth noting that a Gladiators win would allow them to clinch a top 6 spot in the playoffs, and a Spark win would put them in a pretty good position to make top 6 as well. A Spark loss, on the other hand, would put them in the danger zone. There is a world in which Seoul or Shanghai could steal their spot if they fail to get more than one win in the next 3 games. What I find interesting about this game is that both of these guys are kind of coming off opposite sides of the spectrum. One team seems to be trending upward while the other is looking weaker. The Gladiators had to reverse sweep the Fuel, who are widely regarded as a bottom 3 team in the league right now. Meanwhile, the Spark nearly took down the NYXL and beat the Hunters 3-1. The Spark have a good opportunity to show that they have bounced back after the rough start to the stage by having a good outing against a solid team like the Gladiators. And with the Fuel giving them all they can handle last week, it seems like they might be a little vulnerable right now. But I have my doubts about the Spark still. They seem to be inconsistent. They had 1 good week and 2 bad ones so far. It's hard to say which version of the Spark we'll get. Even if it's not by much, the Gladiators have been the more consistent team this stage, so I'm going to predict them to win the set 3-1, therefore allowing them to clinch a top 6 spot in the playoffs. Moving on to Saturday, there are 3 matches that you should be looking out for. Game number 1 will be between the LA Valiant and Boston Uprising. Yes, on paper this game seems like it could be a bore since the Uprising haven't been very good as of late, but this game is crucial for the Valiant and the playoff race. If the Hunters lose to the Shock and the Valiant beat the Uprising, then they'll have a temporary lead over them in the standings. This game means everything to the Valiant. They can't afford to drop games they're expected to win because their schedule during the homestand is pretty brutal. Boston, on the other hand, is basically already eliminated from the playoffs, so they may be looking to play spoiler by beating the Valiant and quite possibly ruining their playoff hopes. One specific individual matchup in this game I recommend looking out for is Persia versus Kariv. Kariv has been carrying his team game after game since Stage 3, and if Boston wants to have any chance of winning, then Persia is going to have to replicate the plays that Kariv tends to make. Persia cannot afford to keep falling behind his flex support counterparts like he's been doing this stage. He has to show up in a big way if nobody else does on his team, or they are doomed to fail. My score prediction for this one will be the Valiant taking the series 3-1, but you never know with Boston. For all we know, they could end up making this a really tough match for the Valiant. The Uprising are very unpredictable, but with how they've looked this stage, it's hard for me to believe that'll end up happening. Up next, we have the Fusion taking on the Dynasty, and would you look at that, it's another game between 2 teams who are very close with each other in the standings. There is a realistic chance for both of these teams to sneak into the top 6 if the Sparks slip up, so this game is pretty big. And even if it becomes impossible for these guys to make top 6, getting the highest seed possible for the play-in will definitely put them in a better position to make the overall playoffs. And if the Dynasty were to lose to Shanghai, then that gives Philly the chance to finish higher than them. I know it may seem crazy, but there is a world where the Dynasty or a Fusion could finish close to that bottom of the top 12 cutoff. Since both of these teams have inconsistency issues, I think the odds of this game being close and or going to map 5 are high. And hey, the Fusion have already gone to 4 map 5s this stage, so with that said, I'm picking the Dynasty to win 3-2. I think Seoul are a bit more confident right now since the Fusion suffered 2 bad losses last week compared to Seoul's 1. But with how unpredictable this stage is proven to be, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Philly ends up being the ones to take it instead. And lastly, we wrap up the night with the Hunters taking on the Outlaws. Houston are already eliminated from the playoffs after taking an L to the Justice, so I'm sure they'll be looking to play spoiler to the Hunters who are still fighting for their playoff lives. And although the Outlaws have been horrible for the most part at this stage, they've had their moments where they took a top tier team off guard. It happened in their win against the Gladiators and a map 5 loss to the Justice, so I think there's a realistic shot where the Outlaws give the Hunters a run for their money. And as I said before, the Hunters are coming off a rough loss to the Spark, so anything is possible right now. Chengdu are known for doing stuff like this. They tend to pull off a few impressive wins every stage, but then they also have a few of those games that make you say, how the hell did they lose that? Sometimes it's hard to tell which version of the Hunters will come to play, but what I'm thinking is that they buckle down and win this game since their season could come to an end on that night if they don't. If the Hunters go 0-2 this week and the Valiant win at least one of their next 3, then there's a good chance they end up being eliminated unless the Reign somehow have a massive meltdown. Because so much is on the line for them, I believe the Hunters win this 3-1. Also, I recommend paying attention to the DPS in this one. Yang Zhou, Jinmu, Linkser, and Dante have been the ones making plays for their teams all year long. These are the guys that are dependent on the most, and I think whichever side pops off more will be the one to win. And last, but certainly not least, I have one Sunday match to look out for, and that of course involves the Atlanta Reign and London Spitfire. This is yet another good test for the Reign this week, and on paper this game could be really good. London has been really strong this stage, so I think a win over them would be really big for the Reign. Plus, there is a scenario in which they could miss playoffs, so every game is pretty big for them from here on out. And although things look pretty good for London as of right now, who are sitting pretty in the top 6, losing this game potentially boots them out if Seoul or Shanghai play well enough. These teams appear to be pretty evenly matched in terms of skill level and ability to play well in the current meta, so I'm expecting a close one. I personally would recommend paying attention to Prophet versus Erster. It's the battle of flex gods, and I think it's going to be really fun to watch. There's a lot on the line with this match, and I'm curious to see how these teams step up. This especially goes for the Atlanta Reign. We've witnessed the Spitfire be clutch so many times in the past, but we can't really say the same for Atlanta. The Reign have so much they could get out of this match by playing well. Here's their second chance in the same week to prove they can compete with the top dogs in the league while showing they're clutch enough to be worthy playoff contenders. But unfortunately for the Reign, that same role that I had with them with the Justice applies to this match as well. Until the Reign prove to me that they can defeat a top tier opponent, there is no way I can pick them to win these types of games. So I'll pick London to win it 3-2. And that's all of them. Those are my key matches for this week. What matches are you looking forward to? Make sure to let me know down in the comment section. And if you did enjoy this content, then be sure to like and subscribe. And sadly, this will be the final video in this series, guys. This is the final normal week of the regular season, so this is the end, I'm afraid. So with that said, I just wanted to thank you guys so much for giving this series consistent love and support. It means the world to me that so many people look forward to every single episode. Rest assured, so long as nothing happens to me, this series will likely make a return for the 2020 season. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.